It's great to look out and see Len and Patty Eaton, who were just inducted into the Tulsa Historical Society Hall of Fame, because there's moments in life when we feel like we are part of history, or like we're witnessing history in the making. Moments like September 11th, 2001, watching planes crash into skyscrapers over New York, and watching the towers fall and the heroes rise up. Moments like Obama's election as the first African-American president. Some of these moments are pregnant with incredible joy and hope and possibility. Some are devastating and deflating, and they beckon us to despair. People my parents' age talk about watching the first man take steps on the moon, and when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. We remember these moments. We sense that something profound and important has changed forever, especially during big national or international events. But we also have such turning points in our own personal lives, too. They may not mean a great deal to others or the world around us, but they change us forever. The birth of a child, a pregnancy, the death of a relative or friend, the unanticipated ending of a marriage, a particular horrific or scary event. All of these are moments when time seems to stop or slow way down. And there's a thickness to time, as if the clock begins ticking more slowly, or the hands of time get suspended for a while. For me, the night that my daughter died was obviously one of those times. And for months and months and months afterward, I was living a different quality of time. Life as I knew it had changed forever. On the flip side, in 2008, when I woke up the morning after the election, and I was reading editorials from various newspapers about the meaning of this election of Barack Obama as the first black president of the United States. I remember I was sitting at the family computer, scrolling through and reading these editorials, and my son Elias, he was 8 years old. He walked over and he saw tears streaking down my eyes and down my face, and he was clearly confused by them. He'd never seen anyone cry tears of joy. That's because he doesn't remember that night when he was born, and I wept tears from a place in my heart that until he arrived, I didn't even know existed. But on that morning in 2008, my 8-year-old son was so surprised at this trickle of clear liquid that was making its way down my cheek that he took his index finger and he poked my cheek right where the stream was, and then he looked at it and he touched it to his tongue, presumably to see if they were salty. And then he smiled and he gave me a big hug. He probably wondered if tears of joy tasted sweet. It almost seems like they ought to. I felt it, along with millions of us, that the world as we had known it had changed forever, and it gave me great joy and hope. 3 weeks later, my daughter was born, and we adopted her, and she happens to be black. And all she's ever known is a black president and first family of the United States with 2 girls that look very much like her. And it's looking more and more conceivable that she could reach her 16th birthday and all she will have ever known is a black and a female as our president. The world that she is growing up in is so different than the one I was raised in. It's not that racism is gone or sexism, far from it. This weekend's news alone tells us a lot about that. But wow, how things have changed. It begs some age-old questions about hope and about progress. What is our role in making history happen and in moving the world towards justice and what's right and what's good and what's peaceful? Do our actions, do our voices, do our organizations really matter? Do things really change? I mean, really change. And how do we know if it's progress or regress or whether it will stick or stay or change back? And then there's the question of what is God's role in all of this? I think most of us would agree that humans are actors on the stage of history, but what about God? Does God act in history? I want to dive into these questions a little bit this morning. In Haiti, along with the Florida and Carolina coasts this weekend, people have been praying to God to protect them and their homes. And people, no doubt, have been lifting their fists at God as they've lost loved ones and property. We call such events acts of God, or at least the insurance companies do. I want to take you back to when I first arrived in Tulsa. In the year 2000, I was 31 years old. And on my first week here at the church, a group of gay and straight allies asked me to meet with them. We sat in a big circle in my office, and they said that they wanted All Souls to become an officially welcoming congregation for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Now, we already had many gay and lesbian, bisexual, and some transgender members by 2000, and we had been performing same-sex unions in this community for 2 decades. In fact, Oklahomans for Equality began here at All Souls and met here for years before they had the money and stature to have their own building. They had trouble finding other places to meet back then. And we had an active response to the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and 90s. We even buried many gay men. My predecessors buried many gay men who were not otherwise able to receive a dignified funeral in their own or their family's churches. So we were doing the work, but we had not made it official, and some of us knew that it was time. There were steps to be taken, and not everyone was happy that we were talking about things like lesbians and transsexuals. These were not words that people were used to saying or hearing in public. We put on panel discussions and offered classes. I remember some older people on their way to a Bible class in 2002. They stumbled by surprise into a forum on bisexuality. And they blushed a little when they told me that they were glad that they had made the mistake. It was a heady time. And we eventually made the small but significant leap to becoming officially a welcoming congregation within our denomination in 2004. Now then, we became involved as a church in the fight for marriage equality. Before 2008, few of us would have imagined the United States ever electing a black president, or not for a long time. It still felt so far away until it happened. Well, it felt the same way in 2014. Few of us imagined that gay marriage would ever be legal in Oklahoma, or that we would be the absolute last, dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. In 2004, the Oklahoma Senate and House both voted overwhelmingly for a constitutional ban against same-sex marriage. And then the voters of the state of Oklahoma overwhelmingly supported that constitutional amendment. We had our work cut out for us, those of us who decided to take on this cause. We were fortunate that 4 amazing and courageous women, Mary Bishop and Sharon Baldwin, Susan Barton and Gay Phillips, decided to sue the state of Oklahoma. Now, one of the tried and true techniques for people trying to upend the status quo is to create what could be called an ethical spectacle. And so we decided to do that. In 2013, on Valentine's Day, we hosted an engagement party for same-sex couples, and we had 23 ministers representing over a dozen denominations and 1 rabbi, and we blessed 33 gay and lesbian couples in this community who were engaged and ready to get married. Now, at the time, the governor of Oklahoma had just stated that Oklahomans were religious people and did not want, nor would we accept, gay marriage in our state. We put on a spectacle, all right, or I should say a spectacular party with champagne and roses and great decorations, I might add, and we blessed over almost 3 dozen couples that night. And we invited the media, and they came out in force, having never seen anything quite like this before. And we let the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community and the rest of the great state of Oklahoma know that there were plenty of people and clergy and churches and communities who were ready and willing to affirm these relationships and these people and who they were, and that their marriage mattered and that their commitments mattered and that our communities would be better for it. And that we were waiting for the law to be passed so that we could consecrate these relationships. So less than a year later, when I stood on this chancel and I performed my first wedding ceremony for a same-gender couple of this church, it was one of those moments. Karen Dale and Kathy Furlong had been together as a couple for 35 years. They had been members of this congregation for 33 of those years. On that night, when the family and friends and co-workers got all dressed up and filled this sanctuary to celebrate this moment of full recognition of their relationship after 35 years, they walked each other down the aisle. And when they walked into the sanctuary, all of us rose to our feet and broke into spontaneous applause. We could have filled a bathtub with the tears of joy that were flowing during that procession. The hands of time slowed down, and it was a sacred moment. They were married, but the rest of us were baptized in the universal waters that flow from the hearts of all of those who experience unmitigated joy. When shame is lifted, when lives are affirmed, and love wins the day. In that moment, we all thought to ourselves, what a wonderful world. And when the choir sang that song by Louis Armstrong during the ceremony, it resonated like never before. But as far as we've come, we still have a long way to go. We aren't where we want to be, but we sure ain't where we used to be. And yet it's hard to keep hope alive sometimes when we see all kinds of events and trends. And I've been watching a generational conflict that I've been finding very fascinating right now, as our youth and young adults today are not comforted by their elders when we tell them, "Oh, you have no idea how far we've come." But these young people say it gives us no solace to hear that we've come a long way. They want full equality. They want to be treated like everybody else right now. Of course they do. They don't have patience for those who would still treat them differently because they're gay, or because they're a woman, or because they have dark skin, or because they're overweight, or for some other reason. We've come a long way does not feel very reassuring or affirming. And in Baltimore and Charlotte and Dallas and Minnesota and elsewhere, young people have taken their anger to the streets. Just in this past year, and some of them have turned to destruction and violence. For those who try to comfort them with ideas of God being active in history, one wonders, God active in history? What about the Crusades and chattel slavery? The Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, the current Syrian civil war, even the disasters in Haiti. How can we say with any confidence that God is an actor in history? Certainly if God is some form of greater intelligence that is making decisions about who dies and in what horrible ways, then it's hard to believe in such a God, and it's certainly hard to understand why anyone would praise and worship such a God. But if by God we mean to describe the pull that calls people to love and to mutual caring, then maybe by such a definition we can imagine wanting to align ourselves with God, or with that energy and force that calls us to love even despite the tragedies and injustice that besets us. One can even imagine praying to call upon that incomprehensible source of love that allows us to heal our broken hearts and that helps us to find forgiveness. And when we experience that unmitigated joy that such love brings us, we can even imagine giving thanks. Any of us who have experienced death of someone we love, betrayal, prejudice, abuse, illness, and have lived to love and to tell about it, have reason to give thanks. None of us really know if we will ever live in a world that's truly just and equal. And we don't even know whether our efforts to create change even make any lasting difference for good. We don't know. And yet, our hope cannot come only from the results of our activities. Our hope must come from the fact that we have the courage to try. The hope is in the living for the good and for mutual understanding. To sit on the sidelines, to fail to vote, to advocate, to mentor, to protest, to organize, is to give up hope. And then we can be quite sure that change is not going to come if we give it up. It's been said all evil needs to prosper is for good people to remain silent. So let us align ourselves with the forces that call us to love by whatever name. and by whatever understanding. But there is indeed a force that calls us to love even when we probably shouldn't or wouldn't or couldn't. Let us do it not with certainty that we are right in all our endeavors, but not with expectation of victory. But let us align ourselves with such love and justice, knowing that to do otherwise would rob us of our very humanity, would rob us of our souls. I would rather die young doing what I believe to be right than live a long life of cautious complacence, which is to surrender to cynicism and to give up hope. The people who handed to us this tradition, this church, were as flawed as we are and as hopeful. They understood the words of the great Unitarian theologian of the 21st century, James Luther Adams, that ours is a religion that is personal, but it is not private. Adam said it is personal, and that we understand that each person is on their own unique journey, and we give each other the freedom to believe and to doubt and to question in the ways that we are so inclined. But he said a religion that is private is a sham and a disgrace. By which he meant that to hold values that we keep to ourselves and that do not call us into being agents of change in a world of injustice is a sham, and it's not a faith worth having. And so we carry on, trying to live lives in accord with love, as we understand it. And what is justice but love put into action? These are scary times, pregnant with danger and with hope. I don't know what this upcoming election will bring, or how long we'll be threatened by terrorism, or how long we'll be held back by racism and prejudice. I do know that we're in the second wave of the civil rights movement right now in this country, and some people are joining up and taking it seriously, like this church. Others are still oblivious or fighting to keep things the same. What I do know is that I will always cherish certain moments. When my children were born, when the first black president was elected in America, when Karen and Kathy stood up here and their relationship was finally recognized and they were finally married. Those times when we believe with all of our hearts, what a wonderful world. We're certainly not where we want to be, but we're not where we used to be. And I like to think that some things we've done have supported, having helped make this world more livable and more lovable. Despair is always an option. Choose hope. Choose hope.
We are your church, and we are proud to be your church, or at least a church that's having a positive impact on your life. I am personally blessed to be your minister, or at least a minister who you're allowing to speak into your life. I hope you'll support our ministry and share your love beyond belief by texting LOVEBB to 41444 or go to our website. But you can just text LOVEBB to 41444 and make your gift. It's wonderful. Thank you. Be blessed and be a blessing.